Welcome to it. Look at me. I'm gonna let me say.
It's always those beautiful outtakes.
Right? Just like, dang. Okay. Welcome to another episode of Feel Good, the podcast. I'm your host, Malika Lee, and today my guest is Mr. Mark Monroe. Welcome, Mark.
Hello, what's up, good humans?
Yes, we're changing it up a little bit, as you all can see. If you're watching this on YouTube, we're doing some video instead of just our normal audio recording. With that aside, I'm so excited to jump right into it. So let me tell you a little bit about Mark. So he's the managing principal and troublemaker at Red Eye Studio. He's a startup believer in radical ideas and projects and co-creator. He's also a trader, investor, and producer of a YouTube channel called The Come Up Series, where he shares his learnings to show people how to create wealth with strategy and investing in the stock market. And it wouldn't be right if I didn't give a plug that he is also a fellow HBCU graduate, the T, the U.
U-S-K-E-G-E-E Tuskegee. Woo! Woo!
I did not go to Tuskegee, but I was just down a couple of states down the way at Spelman College. But, you know, it's all HBCU love.
Always.
So today we're going to be talking about up-leveling our money stories or up-leveling our money mindset. And Mark, you are the perfect person to do this with. So I want to just get started and jump right in.
Let's do it.
Okay, just a couple quick pop culture questions. Is it true? More money, more problems?
No, it's not true. It depends upon how is it that you're set up first. If you got a lot of drama that's around you, then yeah, definitely more money, more problems. But if you live a life that's already simple and more money comes through, it's still the same. Okay.
And another pop culture, these are, questions that came to mind. Are your haters your motivators?
Always. Always. There's nothing better to do than, the greatest revenge is, not to give revenge back, but just be successful.
Yes, I've heard that. And I bet you sleep better at night too than being vengeful, in that way.
No, it's, you have some phenomenal dreams.
Okay, so let's get right into it. I saw in one of your videos, you said that success is traceable.
Yes.
So I'm wondering with you, if we were to explore your journey looking back, what are some of the highlights that stand out to you that trace the successes in your life?
Ooh-wee. So if I take it all the way back, greatest success for me was probably my greatest accident that I made, which was putting a hole in my grandparents' wall.
Oh, say more about that.
Yeah, so my grandfather used to have like those Saturday investment, meetings with like folks that he knew, and they would sit down and talk investments on Saturday morning. Me, I didn't really care about that at the age of 8/9. I cared that my grandfather always was a connoisseur of donuts. And he always had the best ones. And I knew that the folks that, they knew my grandfather knew donuts. So I would try to get up early in the morning, hang out in this room that was next door. Like the walls were so thin, so I had to be quiet. And I would hang out there. I got up early one morning, just didn't get that much sleep for some reason. And then I fell asleep on the ironing board, and then the ironing board tipped over. And there was the iron on one of those classic irons that's like, it can hurt. Yeah. So it sent the ironing board flying, and there was a drywall, and then the iron went through the wall.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So I think that was like the very beginning, because had I not done that, I always believe that you're where you're supposed to be. And so I believe that had I not been there to make that decision, then ultimately I would have been forever hiding behind a wall and never really like having that door open for me to actually learn something that would literally like change my life. That's the first, I say, success, the ultimate success right there, where it was traceable. The second moment was making that decision once I got to school, like at college in 2004, was making that decision to say, okay, hey, my grandfather just left me with $1,000. I just literally not paid for it, but I just literally got a student loan on my own. And now I really got to figure this out. And loans is definitely not where I want to be to literally finance my education. I know about this thing called investing, but it doesn't move fast enough. So I had to make a decision. Made the decision. First, of course, your first try is always like your worst try. But I think that the part there was I had that moment where I said, okay, hey, I think I got it partly right, but then also like I definitely made some significant mistakes. Now, most people would say, okay, hey, I just failed and, honestly, this isn't for me. I took the other approach and said, you know what happens if I make a few tweaks here and there? And if I really believe in myself, then I can do this. Mm-hmm. And so I made the decision to say, okay, hey, I'm going to give myself another 6 months at this, and I'm going to give it a significant go and then see where this takes me. And again, traceable. And then, of course, making a few great startup ideas, really focusing my energy there, versus like doing the other stuff of just like, typically just focusing on the 9 to 5, and all the while still trading and investing. All those decisions that I made are the summation of where I am today, because I can truly say, had I not made those decisions, I wouldn't be sitting here at this time to literally be discussing, wealth, finance, or whatever it may be, whatever subjects may come, to you or to your audience. So that's huge.
You spoke on so many different highlights, and I want to explore some of them in more detail, because I'm really interested to hear about your grandfather that was already doing some trading, and he may have been a part of a group that my great uncle was a part of. Was it primarily Black men?
Yes.
Okay, I think my great uncle was in that group, and
it's
so you got to be in the room.
Because there was a lot of solid dudes that came into the house, and I was like, I started lining them up because I was like, okay, this person seems like a maple bar kind of person. This person could possibly go from an apple fritter. This person could possibly like one of those cream filling donuts, which, man, I literally had it down to a science.
I'm not sure which kind of a man he would have been, but I can see he probably definitely had a sweet tooth. But were you the only kid in the room? Because it sounds like when the iron went through the wall, then you were the only one. So you started going inside the room after the iron went through the wall. That's when you started joining them, kind of sitting in the room for the meetings versus just hovering over the donuts and waiting.
Yes. So in order for me to earn the donuts, my grandfather, like the first day, like when it all happened, my grandfather, of course, I had to go through somewhat of a recalibration moment with my grandfather. And then he brought me back downstairs, and sat me down, and he said, he's like, at the end, I'm going to ask you, what did you learn? Mm-hmm. So make sure you pay attention. Mm-hmm. And with, a few little tears falling down my eye, he gave me a donut, and I was like, all right, cool. This felt like it was worth it, but, I still got a job to do. And every Saturday, or I think it was every other Saturday, it was just like, it became like clockwork. He would wake me up in the morning. He would even take me to the store to get the donuts and everything else. And then essentially I would have an assignment, and I would just sit there amongst, awesome Black men that, were all a part of like different careers and everything else, and sitting down and talking about the markets. And at the time they were more so like investing in stocks. Mm-hmm. When I got to college, the world of stocks for me was like, okay, that's great. But that's when the options market was introduced to me. And so now it's like, after like a few, decades, so to speak, now I'm teaching my grandfather, which is pretty cool. It came back full circle. So now I'm teaching him options trading.
Oh, I love that. I love that full circle moment. That's so powerful. So just to clarify, yep. Did you grow up in a sense of wealth, and was that the MO of your family, or what would you say shaped your money mindset as a kid?
I would say that my grandparents were like, we were middle class, for sure. The money wasn't always there, so to speak. I mean, the bills were always paid. But my grandparents always had this, like, they may not have been wealthy, but they had wealth mindsets.
Say more about that. What do you
So,
see as a wealth mindset?
the wealth mindset is that they were, you know, my grandfather always used to say, Mark, what's the difference between being rich and wealthy? And then, you know, understanding the concept of, you know, riches can be taken, wealth is built. So whatever wealth that you're going to have, it's going to be built by whatever it is that you either toil to do, or say, for example, what your mind creates. And so that's always that he always instilled that into me. And then he taught me 4 key principles that where he was like, yo, you want to be wealthy, master these. He was like, you're younger than me, you have more time and everything else. So, you know, the world is your oyster if you just take advantage. So he taught me the value of time, cost, worth, and value. He taught me those 4 concepts, and he said, with those four pillars, you know, being wealthy is not about having money; it's about more so having options. So he was like literally programming me from day one to literally say, all right, well, hey, this is how you should navigate. So that's why I said he had wealth mindset, but it's like, you know, given that, you know, you now have taken 2 boys, you know, out of the foster care system and raised them as your own. And then on top of that, it's like, you know, to have a career, but he also had entrepreneurial efforts. You know, that's the reason why I said it's like, you know, they weren't what society today considers wealthy, but in my mind, it's like, yo, my grandfather was probably the wealthiest guy that I knew. You know, he never spent beyond his means. He lived very simple. He was very, like, you know, my grandmother always struggled to buy my grandfather a gift because he was that simple. They traveled. I mean, they found value in travel and experiences versus, you know, materialistic things. So to me, that's why I said it's like more so their mindset was wealthy, but versus, say, for example, what society places of wealth, which is having exorbitant amounts of money.
Right. And flashing it in some way.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you mind delving into a bit of the 4 pillars a little more? Because some of them
Sure.
seem straightforward, but like worth and value, I'm like, those seem really similar. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like the things in which that we value are more so the things in which that what we feel. Like, you know, worth is what somebody is going to probably put some type of, you know, tag on it, whether it's through events in time, or even if it's a monetary thing, somebody's going to tell you what it's worth. It's going to have some type of definition. Value is going to be something that's going to be completely internal, which is going to walk throughout like your entire like existence. So for example, the things that I value, though, like everybody tells me, like, asks me like, Mark, what is the one thing that you value above everything else? My time. You know, I could lose money. Like, you know, I've done that and we'll probably get into that. But at the same token, it's like, waste my time. I'm more upset that you wasted my time versus money being lost. And the cost of what it cost me to go through that process, whether it's the cost of like paying for something or the cost in which that the time was spent, whatever that is spent, that's the cost. The worth, again, comes down to, okay, hey, is it worth it for me to do it? It's like an opportunity cost. So they all kind of interconnect with each other. What's it worth it to me to do this or to go through this process? Is it worth it? And then at the end, the other side of it is really where, now that I've gone through this, what was the value? What was the value of the lesson that I learned? What was the value that it brought to my life? What was the value and meaning that it gave me? I mean, those are really pretty much the 4 pillars and how he taught it to me.
And that applies, especially with time. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like I could see that in every area of life, you know,
Correct.
whether it was it worth it and the value. So let's go, because then you mentioned college. And as another touchstone as far as a successful area of your life. And it's so interesting. I'll tell you a little bit more about my experience with college, because you mentioned student loans. So my follow-up question to you is about, you said about $1,000 your grandfather gave you, and then you got student loans. And then you mentioned investing. So I'm like, was he investing $1,000 that grandpa gave? Was he investing money from the student loans? So yes, what's the deal? How did that play out?
So what I ended up doing was $1,000 was like literally like my, like if everything goes bad, this is all I got. So this $1,000, if this whole scenario doesn't work out, yo, this is my fallback for me to literally hop on a flight to head back to Seattle.
What? But you know what? I want to, huh?
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I want to break that down though for the listeners, because it's so important to have a backup plan, like to set a little bit of that aside. You didn't invest everything. You set aside that money if this doesn't work out. And I think that's so important to point out.
Oh yeah. So like here's how it went down. Like, cause I thought that my grandfather was like literally going to like, you know, write the check for me to go to college and everything else. And it's like, all right, hey, I got you paid for the first year of college. The rest is on you. Go do awesome things. Boom. Wrong. That was not the case. Literally, we went through the whole orientation process, and then they were like, all right, well, make sure you go to the bursar's office so that way you can take care of your financial arrangements. So I was like, all right, so let's go to the, you know, I had already did my financial aid. So that part was like, I knew that I was going to like possibly have like a Pell Grant or something like that. And so then my grandfather was like, well, I'll see you later. This is it. I got to head back to Seattle. What? He was like, oh, by the way, here you go. Gave me an envelope. I'm looking through. I was like, okay, so this is like for me to have spending money or like to just sit in savings? He was like, no, this is it. I was like, this school costs like almost like 30 grand a year. Like, what are we talking about? And he was like, Mark, you're smart. You'll figure it out. And then literally like, you know, he already had a taxi called and just gone. So then I'm just sitting there in my dorm room that I've got to figure out how to pay for it. So then I go to the bursar's office and I'm like, hey, this is what my scenario is. And they were like, well, hey, have you, thought of a student loan? And I said, well, how much am I going to need? And she was like, well, this is the cost of attending Tuskegee University. And I'm like, well, I shouldn't just do a loan for the cost because I'm also going to have other things like, whatever it may be, well, food came through the room and board. So I was in the freshman dorm, unfortunately. So I literally took out maybe a little bit more. Like I pretty much borrowed to the max. I borrowed to the max of what is it that I could borrow that my Pell Grant and, financial aid wouldn't cover. And so then what I did is after that, I said, all right, this is probably going to be the last loan that I take out. Like I need to come up with a strategy. My grandfather says that I'm smart enough, so I need to figure this out. I figured it out how to cover my first year's worth of tuition. But how do I take care of myself for next year and not have to be reliant on anybody?
Right.
And then that's when I said, okay, hey, well, my grandfather taught me investing. I still have a bunch of shares in all these, companies that were pretty amazing. And then when I went to go look at the balance and I said, okay, balance versus what college is costing, not going to be enough. So I literally sold out of all my shares, took the balance from what I had from college, from student loan. And then that's when I literally started my first trade.
Wow. So you started investing in high school, or when did you make your very first trade?
I started investing when I was 9. I bought my first stock when I was like 9.5, 10. I made my first options trade as an adult my freshman year, August 2004 at Tuskegee University.
Wow. So how did you even learn about options? Was it something they talked about in the investment group?
No. They were very much so talking about fundamentals, a little bit of technical analysis, but more so fundamentals and understanding business models of the company, which was helped me out a great deal. And then there was also every now and then where we would talk about stuff around the world and how it impacts. That was my first crash course into economics.
Right.
So then pretty much when I got to college, I was like, okay, I've heard of this thing called options, did a little bit of research, Google, my best friend, or Yahoo at the time, or if it worked, it was always askjeeves.com. But pretty much from there, it was like literally, I dove deep into learning as much as I could. I went to go talk to some of the professors who didn't even know me at this time, because mind you, I'm freshman. So I'm asking about like options trading and everything else. They don't understand it. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to figure this out on my own. And that's exactly what I did.
Books, Ask Jeeves, like online books, both, or trial and error?
Yeah, because it was a combination of all of it. You know, I had to look up stock derivatives, which, you know, pretty much that's what, you know, options are. Then I also had to look up, you know, how is it made? I actually had to call E-Trade. I actually had to call up one of the brokers for him to walk me through. I actually talked to customer service, and he was like, he literally walked me through how the process went, and I was taking notes the entire time.
Wow. And you gave yourself your whole year to get it together to figure out how to make enough money to pay for your following year.
Yep. And my first trade was horrible.
Go ahead, go get it. Let's get into it. That sounds like you lost everything.
Horrible.
So let's clarify before we go forward, just contextually, can you break down very briefly for those that aren't familiar with the terms, what's the difference between stocks and an option? Options, yes.
So a stock is pretty much like if you're buying some form of ownership into a company. So you buy one stock equals one like small part of a company that you now own. So it's like having equity in a company. It's just that it's very small, minute percentage of the company. Now you can buy as many shares as you want or as much as that's being offered. And then essentially you can be like Warren Buffett and essentially over time pretty much have a large stake in the company. An option, though, is pretty much the ability to either buy or sell. So there's a contract. So let's step out of the stock market a little bit. Let's go into real estate. So let's say that I want to buy a house and I want to own it, but yet I don't have all the money to buy it. So I can literally do what is called a rent to own option. And pretty much I say that like there's pretty much an established contract of what price that I'm willing to buy it at or possibly even sell. So there also comes with an expiration. So it's timed. So by that expiration period, it's either going to have to be at the value where it's going to, or higher to bring forth more equity for me, which is more equitable. But if it goes down and the value of the house drops and I'm still on the hook for that contract, then pretty much that contract gets pretty much useless. The same thing works within a stock. Now, why do I go with options versus, say, for example, the stock? It is because of the fact that I can make 10 times more in my investment than I can do within an option, because within every contract, there's 100 shares, 100 potential shares to be bought or sold versus me having to buy every single one of those stocks. So if you think about it, like the math is different. So the earning potential is higher.
Totally. And there's leverage there that I didn't know existed in the stock market, which is why I gravitated to real estate when I was, building my investment and financial quotient. You know what I mean?
You're building your empire.
Exactly. Still in process, but yes, that's why real estate made more sense to me versus the stocks. But then when I heard about options, I was like, oh, that's where it is. Okay, exactly. Okay, so thank you for that brief educational overview for those that were lost in the terminology. So then you said your first option trade didn't go so well.
No, I mean, let's just say this. It started off well. Okay. Because I was able, the beautiful thing about growing up, understanding the basics of investing through stock helped really pave the way for me in setting price targets and stuff like that for stocks. So when you're doing options, of course, you set the price target or the strike. So I remember setting my price, and I remember the first week, here's the other part. I literally gave myself a 2-week position. So the position was going to expire in 2 weeks. So I invested $1,500, which, I mean, to an 18-year-old, that's a lot of money.
Shoot, even if you're not 18, to a lot of people, that's a lot of money.
Talk about it.
Yeah.
So then my 1,500 went to 4,500, 4,500. And again, to me in college, woo, I'm cooking with fish grease.
Winning.
Winning. So I was like, you know what? let me just let this cook for a little bit longer. I got class and everything else. So I'm good. Shouldn't have done that. 2 days later, after going through some of the assignments and stuff like that, and then came back, I'm like, yo, let me just check in and see how my money situation is going. Like, I'm feeling cocky. I'm feeling good.
Right.
Come to find out, my position expires in 2 days. And literally I went from $4,500. So from $1,500 to $4,500 to $15.
$15, 15.00.
That is correct. Oh
Nice.
man, I was hurt. I was hurt. I was so hurt. So
that's like a 99% loss, not even of the 45 gain.
That is a fact. That is a fact. That is a fact.
Damn.
So I literally and I was like, oh man. But I learned a valuable lesson in that moment. I was like, yo, I should have sold. Why didn't I sell? Mm-hmm. So I started asking all those questions that, everybody that goes through this process, they your first loss or your first win and all this other stuff. And so I'm asking myself the question, Mark, why didn't you sell? And then I just flat out said, I got cocky. Mm-hmm. I let my cockiness supersede my talent. Mm. And that's not how my grandparents raised me to be. So pretty much, I literally said I deserve that. Now we have to have this real moment. Am I going to do this, or am I going to literally move on from this? And to give myself even more assurance, because then I had to go through that for almost a month of struggle. Mm-hmm. So I had to get cafeteria food and everything else, and I had to be there on time and everything else. I had to do all of that. And it's there was nights where it's I even had to go hungry, because of that decision. Mm-hmm. And then I finally made this decision, you know what, I can do this after doing more studying. I literally went through my whole process of how my trade went through. Mm-hmm. And then pretty much after that, a month later, I felt even more dangerous, in a good way versus when I started. And then to even say, okay, hey, I can do this without being cocky, being more systematic, being more humble at it. I started getting better. And to even put more on myself, I bet on myself. I took out a loan.
Loan.
I took out another loan, but I said, okay, hey, this is going to have rules. I literally took out the loan and I said, okay, hey, this is how I'm going to do it. And I'm not going to use it all at the same time. I was still working while in college, by the way. So I had some income that was coming through. Mm-hmm. So I bet on myself and said, okay, hey, I'm going to do this. And within 6 months after that, I had more than enough to literally cover the loan itself. And on top of that, I had pretty much enough money to cover my next year's worth of tuition.
Wow, in 6 months. So let's go back, because there were some really meaty parts. And this is the part that I wanted to get into as far as the emotional aspect of it, and the mindset. So let's start with the emotions, because in Upleveling Our Money Stories, right? Somebody could have had that same experience and made up a different story about it that could have taken them out of the game.
Correct.
And maybe you had that for a moment and then you talked yourself off the ledge. So let's go into that part first.
Oh yeah. The first few days, I didn't even want to touch my computer. I didn't even want to know it. I didn't want to know eTrade.com. I didn't want to know any of that stuff. I was just look, honestly, I just can't look at this right now. I didn't want to look at the markets. I didn't want to know anything about the company that I had made the trade on, which was Apple. I didn't want to know any of that. I was just look, I don't care.
Yeah.
And then it was funny because once your mind has been exposed to something and you see the realness of it, even though that you just got punched in the mouth, mentally, it kind of also lets you know that, okay, hey, I just learned something. Mm-hmm. Now, either I can run from learning even more about this thing, or I can go even deeper into this and possibly look to master this. And that's really where it came from. Literally, it was probably after 48 hours of licking my wounds, feeling ultimately down on myself. I literally had to come to that realization of understanding, one, the money is gone. Mm-hmm. There's nothing that I can do about it. It's not going to change anything. the only thing I can do is go back and learn what is it that I made a mistake in, what is it that I can do better and become better at it. And then I said, okay, hey, do I want to do this? I'm already a full-time student in college. I'm thousands of miles away from home. There's no safety net for me. What a lot of folks don't realize that when I turned 18, my grandparents actually they were like, hey, you want to be grown? Go be grown. So I actually got kicked out of my grandparents' house. And my senior year in high school, I had to literally live on my own. But I had to remember every single lesson that my grandparents taught me, every single moment in which that self-empowerment of believing in oneself and everything else was literally bringing me to this moment to say, okay, hey, I can do this.
Yeah. Yeah. That confidence.
But it was it's like that moment, it's one of the reasons why I like Drake somewhat. He has that one lyric in his song that says, don't ever forget the moment that you begin to doubt, transitioning from fitting in to standing out. That hits me, because that's really where I felt, where I was like, yo, I was in this moment of transition where I was going from just, regular college student to now it's like, all right, I'm on the cusp of something that I feel like I'm on to something that is I can take all the financial knowledge and all the investment knowledge that my grandparents have given me, and I can apply it and literally build something here. Yeah. Will I do it, or will I just say, okay, hey, put it away for another day, or just give up on it?
And what was if we go back to the values and the 4 pillars, what would you say was the driving value or the catalyst to you making that choice to keep going?
Well, I will tell you this, at that time, as an 18-year-old, it was definitely not time.
Right.
Not time. It was really worth. It was really worth in cost. I looked at it in the sense of cost. I literally had to break it down. Okay, what's this going to cost me? It's going to cost me a few extra hours of studying, which means I won't be able to go in and hit the clubs like everybody else will all the time, because HBCU, it's lit.
And freshman year,
freshman year, everything is pulling your attention. Hey, come join this club. And I was like, okay, I'll join a few clubs, but for the most part, if I feel like it gets beyond this, then it's I'm out. So it really made me understand, okay, hey, what is this all going to cost me? When I even took out the student loan, and then I was like, all right, now I'm taking out a personal loan on myself. I was like, okay, hey, what is this going to cost me outside of just the percentage interest and everything else? I literally sat back and said to myself, what if this falls apart?
Right. That's a real question.
Can I manage this? But then where I got to the part that got me over it was, what's it worth it? What's it worth to me? When I got to the worth outweighed the cost. Okay. The price didn't seem too high. And when the price didn't seem too high for me, then at that point, it made it a fairly easy decision, especially given an optimistic young college student where you believe that everything and anything is possible.
True.
I just literally said the worth far outseats the cost. Even if I lose money still, the knowledge in which that I gain, I may, even if I'm not able to apply it now, I can apply it later. Thank goodness I was able to apply it then, and it worked out. Yeah. But yeah, that's really where it came down to. And then later on, after going through that, I valued it.
Gotcha. So in your mind at 18, what was the worth you associated with it? Oh, I could be able to finish college and pay for it myself. What were some of those conversations associated with worth that made it?
Worth part, I'll tell you, the day where I felt helpless going to the bursar's office and not having an idea of how is it that I was going to pay for my education, or how is it that I was going to, does this, if I can't do this, does my life just literally, what can I do then? Yeah. Really just that moment of feeling truly, truly helpless, and understanding that, okay, hey, it's not even just me not knowing something, but it's just me feeling non-prepared. Yeah. That really did hurt. That really hurt. And looking back, I should have looked at the signs that my grandfather was not going to be paying for college, but I was so caught up in the allure that, okay, hey, I'm here, I made it here.
Right.
That I just missed it. But yeah, that was the biggest thing, is just more so in the sense of, and then also, what is it that I want my life to be? And my life can't be a lot of the things that I would like to accomplish if this thing called money happens to always just be in the way.
Right. And I just want to reflect and just say, wow, in the sense of the depth of questioning and internal processing at 18 is phenomenal. Some people haven't thought about that much of their lives in their 40s or 50s. You know what I mean? Intentionally.
That's a fact.
So I really respect that. And I want to just share very briefly. It's so interesting because I had a similar instance, but had a very different takeaway. So my instance, because I also didn't have a lot of financial support from my family. My dad would pay for my plane tickets to be able to get down there. But I went down there like with somebody else's family that was also going to Spell. And my family didn't come. You know what I mean? It was like, girl, you're on your own. And I kind of knew it. And it's interesting. So I've been a saver since I was a kid. It's interesting how like some money habits, I don't know where it came from. It wasn't something that was taught, but I've pretty much had a active way of like spending way less than I had. Even as a kid, like I would never spend all my money on like, candy or whatever. I'd always keep them. And so what happened for me was when I went to college, for whatever reason, I was terrified of going into debt. No one talked to me about debt, but I was like, I'm not trying to come out with, with any debt. And like I said, I'm going in with not that much money, but I paid for my own books. And I ended up with the Pell Grant, all this other stuff. And what I ended up doing though was a conservative approach. So before we started, I was telling Mark I was in Morehouse's marching band. And so that was part of my hustle. Like I didn't have a job, but I was like actively looking for money. So they would give us money. If you're in the band, you got grants. And so that was kind of like my hustle as far as, making ends meet. And so I kind of did the opposite.
My hustle was?
What?
So, being on an HBCU campus, everybody's always drinking like soda bottles and everything else. So I would while I was like in the midst, like whenever I would take a break from like studying the markets and everything else, I would literally went to Walmart and get these large trash bags if I didn't steal it from the janitor's office. I would literally just collect a bunch of cans.
No way.
Oh yeah. I would collect a bunch of cans in the middle of the night. And I really thought that because my first roommate situation during my freshman year, it didn't work out. So we had to switch roommates. So my next roommate, super duper humble dude and everything else, humble beginnings. And he was just like, yo, you got to cut me in on this. So
y'all were doing this at night when everybody else was asleep.
So in the middle of the night, he had a car. I did not. Okay. So he literally would I would tell him, I was like, I'm going to collect a bunch of cans and everything else. We just had a set drop-off location or pickup location for, hey, when I picked up X amount of cans in the middle of the night, I would put them in the trunk of his car. And then I would go to the next zone and then essentially collect. And then he would meet me at the next zone. So I was getting workouts as well as doing all of that in one swoop. And then, we would literally take it off and then literally go collect the money for what we earned. And then we would split it 50-50.
How much money? I'm just trying to imagine, it's what, 5 cents, 10 cents per can?
Yeah, it was was 10, 15 cents at the time for a can or bottle. And, that stuff really adds up, especially when you're on a campus, an acreage campus.
Right.
Because you had what was it? 15,000 students or 10,000 students.
Wow.
And none of these students are eating healthy or, healthy stuff. So it's it was very easy. So I was just like, yo, just let me go ahead and do that. There was only one time when I almost quit this entire situation. And I did this up till probably 4 months to build up cash reserve and everything else, or just in case if the loan didn't fare out. So it was probably about maybe on runs, I'd probably collect about maybe $150.
That's, yeah. And in Tuskegee, it's a small town, college. Yeah, that's good money.
Very good money.
Night.
Though I got scared one night because there was a raccoon or something like that that was found inside the trash can. And I was like,
yeah.
we're going to skip this.
Yeah, but that goes back to the hustle, creativity, resourcefulness, doing what other people may be unwilling or, unwilling to do.
Live how other folks are not willing to live, so that way when you do make it, you can live how they always dreamed of living, or how you always dreamed of living.
Yeah. That's really powerful. So the end of my story, I ended up moving off campus, which saved a lot of money. Junior year saved a huge amount of money, but we lived in the hood. We literally lived like around the corner.
You lived around the hood.
Yeah, you did too. Yeah, we lived in the hood. Why? Because rent was super cheap. It was walking distance because I also didn't have a car, and I also played basketball. So sometimes we would have 5 a.m. practices. Sometimes we'd have 6:37, and I wasn't trying to be walking through any, too far at those hours of the night by myself, right?
Yeah.
And so that saved me so much money. By the time I finished, because I think Spelman was $20,000 a year living on campus, I graduated with only $5,000, maybe $5,500 in student loans.
That's what's up. Like, I think for me, so after my sophomore year, I was just like dangerous. So
dangerous in the market.
In the market, I was dangerous. Like, it was crazy. And I'm not gonna tell the professor's name, because I don't want to incriminate somebody. But my professor found out what I was doing, and he was like, you seem to be doing pretty well here. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, I can see though that you're not always fully attentive in the class, because like his stats class was just statistics in college, 8 a.m. No good.
I don't even know why you signed up for that one.
I had to take it.
That was the only time.
I couldn't dodge it. And so at the end of the semester, they like, you had to do all this work. And I said, look, you know what I got going on. There's no way possible I'm going to be able to pass this class. He was like, all right, well, show me what you can do. He was like, he gave me $5,000. And then he said, bring me he was like, let's see if you can produce a 25% return before the semester's over, not by the semester's over, by midterms. If you've been able to provide me the sizable return by midterms, then I'll pass you.
Shut the front door.
I was like, now mind you, I'm an options trader.
Right.
So 25%, he knew that he thought that he didn't know that I traded options. He just knew that I was investing in the market. So he thought that, okay, hey, that this is an impossible task. Hey, his grade hangs in the balance, whatever. So 25% in the stock is more so like, for me, we're talking about 300% for me. So I made that probably made that within the first 2.5, 3 weeks.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I held on to it for all this time because I still wanted to learn some things in stats. But I was just like, there's no way I'm going to do any of the homework in this class. So I got away with not doing any homework. And then when it came time for midterms, he was like, Mark, we were having a meeting in his office. So where is it? Pulled out a beautiful envelope, gave him his principal along with a 40% return to that principal.
Oh, you didn't even keep the extra 15. Okay. You gave him.
Hold on. No. See, hear me out. It was a 300% return for me. So I gave him his capital with a 40% return, and he passed me.
And kept the 160. So you paid yourself also in that process.
I mean, I felt like I felt like what he was getting away with was and at that point in time, I was like, I feel like I'm being undervalued.
Yeah.
And that's where I learned that concept of what's the value of my time per hour. My value of my time per hour started being quantified based upon what is it that I was doing in the market. People quantify their time based upon what a company is going to pay you on a full-time basis, which is 2,080 hours in a fiscal year. So I took that same concept, except, I applied it to myself as, okay, Mark, then like the trader, you know, can I get myself to this point where the value of my time is either equivalent or better to somebody who would be working a full-time job?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned, you know, because of course I watched some of your material, and that seemed to be a game changer in the mentality of what is my time worth and
Yep.
how much do I charge for my time? Because often from like an employee mindset, that's not usually set, right? By the person.
You have somebody telling you what they believe the value is, and then people believe it.
Exactly. And so I'm wondering, because I feel like for those that are really wealthy, they've gone on a path outside of that model where
Yep.
somebody's dictating to them what their worth and value is. So my question to you, I had two questions, one more of going back to college, and then we'll get back to this time
Let's do it.
thing. So my one back to college, because the other thing is like, you're on the edge in the sense of you're doing something that it doesn't sound like a lot of people around you understand
Right.
and or can help you with. And
Correct.
so I'm wondering on, there's two parts to that. One is, how do you continue to up level yourself when there's not anyone around you, right? That can kind of iron sharpen iron type thing. And then the other thing is, sometimes with our dreams, if people don't understand it or they don't see it for us, they kind of try to talk us out of it for their own their fears. So I'm curious to hear about that part as far as your community, your tribe. Did you keep it to yourself? Did you share like?
So I remember when I was talking about like, you know, financial markets or just investing in trading. And I remember talking to a few students, a few classmates, and it was like, you know, it's kind of like having that conversation. Oh, that's dope. But yet they're not like, I don't think that you're like fully hearing what I'm telling you. I'm literally giving you like true game here. Mm-hmm. And yet it's like, yo, it's nothing bad about the person. It's just like, I always believe that sometimes your mind is just not ready to receive it yet. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. That's the first part. So like, you know, literally it was a very lonely island. Like, you know, the fact that everything that I was doing, I was pretty much practically doing by myself. And I always looked at it in the sense of, I said, okay, hey, I'm a competitive person. So for me, I looked at it in the sense that I get to take money from folks that work on Wall Street. Mm-hmm. That's how I saw it. I was like, I get to take my reparations out of the market. Mm-hmm. Like, I feel like this is owed to me. Like, and that's ultimately how it was like kind of like built for me. Like, you know, it's like, if I want to live this life of, you know, just ultimate freedom where nobody doesn't have to tell me to clock in or whatever it is, mm-hmm. then I'm going to have to go out there and create it for myself. Mm-hmm. You know, luckily I was raised in a household where it's like, you know, my grandfather, you know, like I said, had an investment club that, you know, everybody thought that was weird. And then on top of that, you know, had a reggae band, but, you know, people thought that was just a hobby, but that actually produced money. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, like he made a few other great, you know, investment decisions, investing in like people's ideas. And my grandmother worked for, at the time, Washington Mutual. Oh, yeah. So it was like, kind of like, you know, this common, and before she worked at Washington Mutual, she was a teacher. Okay. And so, you know, it was kind of like that mindset of just saying, you know, if I'm going to do something, you know, I got to just believe it in myself that I'm going to go out there and do it. Mm-hmm. I shouldn't have to be relying on somebody else, like, you know, affirming what it is that I believe in myself. Mm-hmm. It's either, do I believe that I can achieve this and do it, and I'll make mistakes along the way, but I'll still reach my destination? Mm-hmm. Or will my success, my future success, be relying on somebody else telling me, you know, that, okay, hey, this is possible or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I firmly believe that, because I was like, you know, thinking about a lot of folks out there, you know, a lot of folks wait on other people in order to go for the things in which that they want. And not understanding, like, when you think about the folks that are wealthy, you know, or that have amassed wealth or have reached, you know, whatever wealth, you know, they didn't wait. They went out there and created it for themselves. And many times when you think about like ideas and dreams, you know, and this comes from my startup world, where it's just, you know, all ideas start off as ugly. Mm-hmm. They all start off as ugly. Mm-hmm. It's not until you actually put the work in improving in an idea or improving something that you believe in yourself that it starts to become even more beautiful. Mm-hmm. And then that's when people start to realize it, when they start seeing the final product or when they start seeing the results. What was once ugly to them and now they see the results, they start seeing that, oh man, this is something amazing. This is beautiful. So, that's something that I always carry with myself, and understanding that, whether it's a radical idea or, say, for example, just a simple idea of just the fact of, hey, I want to build wealth, or I'm going to build wealth. And this is how I'm going to do it. At first, it starts off ugly, but then when you start learning and you start researching and you start feeding that knowledge to yourself, it doesn't look as ugly anymore.
Right.
It's like a house. You see a house that's just sitting there as a, frame or whatever it is. That can look pretty ugly. But then when you see that house as it's consistently being built, you start noticing that people walk by it and they just stop by and they take a look at it and they're like, oh, wow. And then when they see the final product.
Right. And that's how most people, that's when they'll jump on the bandwagon, right? When all the
Precisely.
Yeah. So this one, going back to what you're saying with time, and I was watching a video where you were asking someone you were supporting, well, how much is your time worth an hour, for example? And my curiosity went to, because I get the concept, and because you did that video already, maybe I'll link it somewhere so that we don't go down that path. But the path I want to go down is, Brian Tracy, I remember a older friend of mine put me onto him, and he was talking about how we have an unconscious baseline of, even if you play golf, I think was the example he used. And if you think that you're a at par golfer and you're putting along, not thinking about it, and let's say you're 6 under par, if you find out that you're 6 under par, by the time you finish the 18th hole, you'll be at par, because unconsciously you were ahead of your that baseline, or how you saw yourself, right? And then you went down to meet it. And so what I'm wondering for you is the process of up leveling your consciousness, going from this $1,000, right? And then whatever you got in your student loans, how do you constantly up level your consciousness to then increase your baseline in wealth?
Can I tell you something?
Yeah.
I never spent the $1,000. No, for real, to this day, I never spent it.
Is it still in an envelope?
No, I moved it to my brokerage. To this day, it's still honestly, I don't use that account anymore. It just literally just sits there. But, and I don't know, maybe even collecting interest, but I never used it.
Wow.
I never touched it. I never touched it. And I said, and it's I look at that and I said, the leveling up for me was just the fact that, hey, that there are phenomenal things that I want to go out there and do, and I just don't want money to be the reason why I can't do it. So I've always said, okay, hey, well, I'm going to be an amazing trader. I'm going to be a great investor, and I'm going to be an amazing trader. How do I get there? And I've always been the type of person where it's I look at the finish line and then I walk myself back from the finish line. So it's kind of envision that you ran the perfect race, because I ran track and field. So this is probably where it goes. I envision myself running the perfect 400-meter race.
Ooh, that's a brutal one.
That's my race. I envision myself running the perfect race one day. And I just said, this is what it's going to take for me to do it. And I walk myself back every 50 meters, just thinking about it mentally. This is what it's going to take. The final 50 meters, it's hell. It's brutal. But yet, at the same token, it's this is where it's I just got to press on. And walking it back all the way to how I started. And I'm a firm believer that and especially document that. I always tell people the solutions are always there with us from day one. If you want some form of success, then write down what the finish line looks like, and then ask yourself, how did you get to that finish line? And then from that point, how did you get to that point? And then from that point, how did you get to that point? Sooner or later, you will find yourself looking at the starting point. And then you will literally have just designed exactly what the steps are for you to get to your own success. Now it's just a matter of having the discipline and literally making the execution to go out there and do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then you would just constantly increase what the finish line looked like.
Oh yeah, I kept moving the finish line. Like, yo, it's like, okay, once like, because the funny thing is when you do that, and especially going in that process, it's kind of like like as an entrepreneur, like when you start off and you set off as an explorer and you're like, okay, hey, when you finally figure out something, you're like, I got it. Now it's like the next thing is like you set goals for yourself. And 9 times out of 10, when you're executing, like when you're truly, truly executing, you know, where entrepreneurs set those 12-month goals and then they're always shocked where it's just like, oh, I just executed this and I finished this in 6 to 9 months.
Yeah.
Well, it just lets you know that you were thinking too small. You were thinking too small and you set too small of a limit. It goes to show you how much we are like you're the genius of every single person with a little bit of human ingenuity, how far it goes. And so for me, I always found that out, like, you know, just in my trading as an entrepreneur, like when I would set these goals and I'm like, hey, I'm going to accomplish this by this time. It's like some of them I didn't accomplish and that's okay, but I got close. But it just let me know like, okay, hey, I'm setting my goals high and then ultimately I'm going to go for it. And that's literally how it's always like kind of like played out for me. And it's like from the folks that I mentor, I tend to find that it's kind of like that same formula where it's just like, you know, set your goals and then essentially you'll find out exactly like how fast you accomplish them.
When you set your goals, do you also set aside how much time, going back to time and those pillars?
I used to. Now it's more so in the sense that I look at time as like, you know, as you evolve, you start to see time differently. Like for me, I was trading for my survival to start.
Yeah.
I went from trading for my survival for me to just stay in school and everything else to then trading to keep my startup afloat, you know, because nobody would invest in it at the time until we got funded and then we got acquired. And then trading brought me back because of the fact that now that I'm like in this position where I could be thriving, now I'm trading with the idea that, you know, I'm trading for my family's legacy. I'm turning my last name into an asset. I'm like literally owning my 24 hours. You know, literally that's what trading has now like evolved for me, from going from survival to thriving to now essentially like continuing on and building that legacy. So yeah, that's it.
No, that's really interesting. And I know I want to be respectful of time with what we've talked about, and that percolates so many other ideas in my mind. But I want to talk about what I think is really interesting. The evolution you're saying from survival to, you know, keeping your startup afloat, because I know firsthand, sometimes there was a time in my life I was making more money than I ever had, but inside it was survival.
Yeah.
And sometimes people think that, oh, just because you have the money, then automatically your inner parts, right, will change and you'll feel relaxed, or I feel free. Exactly. So can you can you speak to how exactly? That's something people don't tell you, because I was like,
let's expose some myths here real quick. let's expose some myths. Money does not make your problems to go away. It doesn't change who you are.
Yeah. And it won't change how you feel
long term. It won't change how you feel. It won't change any of those things. Money just like essentially is a tool in which that you are able to use it to pay for things. And ultimately, depending on to pay, invest, or even, you know, whether it's like you're donating or investing into something monetary value that comes back to you, you know, it's some type of investment. I look at everything in my life at what is it that I do as an investment. And I look at like, okay, hey, from this investment, 10 years down the road from here, what does this investment of time and everything else, what does it produce? So money just amplifies that.
Right.
It only amplifies exactly your desires and everything else. And ultimately because of the fact that you just know that you have it. It doesn't change the inside of who you are. And if it does, then that's where it's like, it's time for that self-examination, that evaluation of like, okay, really asking that question. Who am I? Who am I with money? Who am I without it? You know, am I my genuine self? Was I my genuine self when I had it? Or did I become something in which that I never wanted to become now that I have this money? You know, there's a lot of folks out there that I know, you know, that have a ton of money and they're miserable. Their lives are miserable. And the reason why is because they haven't learned that lesson. They feel like, I never understood this concept where now that you've amassed this wealth and you have to go through all these, I always say, stunts and shows to like try to prove yourself, or like to buy all these things to impress people that you don't even like. That doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I mean, for me, it's just more so that inner thing of just knowing who you are and exactly what is it that, what are the things that you want at the end of the day, that what you want your legacy to have built, and also the things in which that you would like to improve, or the things that you want to have an impact in. That's where I really see it when we think about wealth. It, when we think about like, the parts on the inside. I'll give a prime example. When I realized that I would never have to work another day in my life, I had a panic attack. I thank this little guy for helping me get out of that panic attack. He came and licked my hand. But I had a panic attack because my mind started racing, because I was like, all I knew through that point was survival.
Right.
Like all I knew was survival. Like, when I didn't even realize like I had already made it to the finish line and everything else. And I was just like, I have to do this. 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 And I didn't realize it yet. I think the other part to that is, literally when we talk about survival, surviving for me was just making sure that I can like literally pay for school. Right. By the time I got to my junior year, I was not only able to pay for school, but I was also able to pay off my student loan. So phenomenal. It was different, but my mind was still like programmed to like, I got to do this, or if I don't do this, it's like, something can fall apart. Right. Even though that was no longer your outer circumstance. That was no longer my circumstance, but to me, that's what it was. When I got to startup world and building a startup, and then there's things that you got to pay for. It's just like, okay, I'm trading for all these things because I got 12 people that I got to like literally pay. Right. And ultimately, the revenue isn't strong enough to literally be able to cover all these people. And I don't want to cut any of them. So I got to go back to what is it that I do best? Yeah. And it was survival. But by the time when I made it to the finish line of that season of my life, and it finally hit me like a ton of bricks. Oh, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. So let's go into that with the time we have left, because I feel like that's a really rich and powerful, because that's part of it that no one's really talking about. You know what I mean? And so then what? The Butter is the dog. Butter came through for you and was a comfort. He came through a panic attack. And then what? So I literally said, honestly, now that I've owned it really hit me. Like, I was like, okay, hey, I own my own time and everything else. I've reached the destination that my grandparents always talked about. I'm here now. But then I looked around and I said, man, where's everybody else at? Real talk. Going back to that loneliness. Where's everybody else at? Like, you have that moment of just like feeling super duper lonely because you look around and there's nobody else. Yeah. There's nobody else around you. Like everybody that you grew up around, the friends and everything else, they're still like in the grind, like literally trying to survive and everything else. The folks you went to college with, their careers have just gotten started. And it's like, it's like, mind you, this was also during the time of the financial crisis. So people are just starting to come out of that recovery, and like they're starting to have careers, and it's like, wow, they're trying to survive. Right. Totally different mindset. My mindset literally said, okay, so I'm no longer trying to survive here, but I see that there's a ton of folks out there that are trying to survive. Just like that, life brought on new meaning and purpose for me. Life at that moment changed. I've always kind of wanted to be the selfless guy. And in the moments hey, there's a decision that's got to be made, make it. And just let your yeses be yes and let your no's be no's. And it was at that moment where it was just like, yo, this is so ridiculous that essentially I'm here And honestly, like, who am I going to call? Who am I going to talk to? Who am I going to go hang with? Who am I going to do all this stuff with? And it's just like all these questions started coming forward. And I said, you know what? Just like I went and built the things in which that I wanted to see, I can do the same thing. And like, you know, taking that mindset and building it into other people. Like when you look at most of whom are wealthy, like the true wealthy people, they spend an exorbitant amount of money trying to make the world better or to make things better versus how they found it or how it found them. Like that's one of the things that I've constantly seen, where you look at Jeff Bezos, he wants to solve climate. When you look at Elon, he was already a billionaire before he even started Tesla.
Right.
And then it's just like, okay, wants to build something greater, you know? And then the other part that I noticed was, it's like, yo, where are the folks who look like us?
Right, that part.
Like, where are the folks who look like us that are trying to make the world better? Like, you know, we talk about like, you know, and that's when I really started thinking about it. I was like, look, it's not about just making folks the money. It's just more so in the sense of like, when people have knowledge, you know, knowledge is probably the greatest drug that you can ever give anybody.
Yeah.
Because once you give them that, like, you know, once you give a person a taste of knowledge, a taste of like, you know, hey, like if I was to like take a person from their existing, you know, life situation and place them outside of that environment for a week, and then they've got to go back after that week. Like they go back to their existing life. Is life the same anymore? Do you see life the same anymore? No. You see it differently. You see it with the world of possibilities and asking yourself, well, how do I get there?
Yeah.
And so that's where I look at it in the sense of like, yo, for me, money became more of a responsibility to make sure that everybody else could see the same thing.
That's powerful, especially our people of color who, when you said reparations earlier, you know, and I still will say and say again, because my degree is in economics. So it gives me a different purview, you know, and one of the things that, you know, I try to talk to people about, and I would say Dr. King felt the same way, but they don't talk about this part of it. He focused on race first, but then he realized it's class. Yes, and racism was a form of classism because they kidnapped our people and ancestors to work. And so that
those are some pretty strong economics behind it.
Right. And so that mentality, I think, is so powerful. And it, you know, even we didn't go that deep into like kind of the familial and the emotional and all these other things, but that. I have a feeling
this is going to be a part 2.
Me too. I'm glad you said that, because I was like, oh, there's so much more. This is such a rich conversation. And, you know, from our time commitment, I will bring it to a close today. But before we do, I want to give you an opportunity with just what you've already shared and where we've gone. Is there anything else that you want to say to feel complete in our time together?
Oh, man. I look at it like this. You know, if you really want to understand like that mental relationship that you have with like money or whatever it is, you know, think about the things in which that you spend at home or that you spend and things that you go out there and buy, and ask yourself, what is the connection? Then at the same token, ask yourself this question: what is my relationship to money? Like, was the conversation about money really discussed when you grew up? And what kind of conversation was it like? And if you feel like you missed out on those types of things, it's never too late. It's just a matter of you just like simply asking yourself continuously the questions and keep being a seeker of the answers to those questions. You know, because I strongly believe the answers are out there. The answers are out there. And it's like, you have to look beyond the facade of, you know, what society will show you, because it's very easy to see it through reality, music, and everything else, and all different types of culture. But look towards the things in which that actually have long-standing value. If things exist and they're able to stand the test of time, then that's where you start to see that the value stands. The cost is going to be the amount of time that you're going to put into it, the amount of energy that you're going to invest into something. But think about it like this. It's more so in the sense that the first thing is, it's not about you investing in markets. It's more so it starts with you investing in yourself. Because if you can't invest in yourself, you'll never be able to ask somebody else, would you invest in me? If you can't. And what's it worth it to you? For me, it was worth everything. You know, did it cost me a lot? Yeah. But, cost and worth are two totally different things. If I had to go back and do it all over again, I wouldn't change a thing. And it's not because of the fact of the success part, but it's more so in the sense of the man in whom which that I became. The journey and the person in whom which that I am, and how is it that I am able to see the world. Investing, I always tell people, investing and trading is easy because you're just clicking a button. Making a decision to spend money, that's easy because of the fact that you just go and perform it. There's a transaction that's had. The part where it's not easy is the accumulation of all that knowledge. And then once you've accumulated it, what is it that you do with it? That's really where the true secret of where wealth is. Like, if Jeff Bezos goes broke, Jeff Bezos won't stay broke. So it's that type of mindset where it's that battle in between ourselves and moving past some of the things in which that we were told. Because, and trust and believe, don't be upset with the folks and the ancestors that have walked before you, because they only knew what they knew. So don't be upset about that. The greatest thing is more so in the sense of you build upon that because you're their wildest dream. You standing here is everything in which that they hope for. And that some of them thought and aspired that they could be that. And whatever it wasn't able to happen, but yet you happen. And I think that that's the greatest investment. So as you move forth in life, don't beat yourself up because of the fact that your journey has started late, or, you're just getting ready to start your journey and you feel discouraged. Don't do that, because that's the easy road to take. It's easy to, literally just, stop running and just sit on the road and just let everybody else pass you by, or let life pass you by. Go out there and just keep moving forward, keep building it. There's more to life than watching people live it. So go out there and live it and learn, and then grow, and then earn.
Mic drop on that. Mic drop moment. Well, there's nothing else I can add to that, except you can find Mark Monroe on Instagram and Twitter with the handle I am Mark Monroe.
Yeah.
And also I cannot forget YouTube, the Come Up series, learning, what Mark has shared with us, his journey consolidated into, a couple hours each episode, right? Some of them are short, like 5-6 minutes.
Yeah.
So if you want to get started, please check out and join the fellow cousins, they call their community, on the Come Up series on the YouTube, their Come Up series channel on YouTube.
Thank you so much for having me. And honestly, I think that, in order to ensure the part 2, since I came on your show, I'm going to have you come on to my show and we talk about the relationship and the mindsets about money and, all those things, because I think that that's powerful. We got to continue on this conversation, because if we stop the conversation, we always believe at the Come Up series, no cousin left behind. So
I love that.
We can't leave anybody behind. So we got to keep this conversation going.
Let's do it. I'm game. Thanks again. Thanks to you all for listening. Thank you to my guest, Mark Monroe. And until the next time, many blessings.